Hello, family. Welcome back to Landline, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I am your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. So we're going to be talking about two things today. One is the Supreme Court, and two is whether or not there's a gender war in America. Is it real? Is it fabricated? Is it ruining all of our lives? This Supreme Court thing matters. So Biden has largely not tested or touched the Supreme Court, despite the fact that they have been overwhelmingly right-sided, like just in the most egregious way possible. It feels completely illegal. It should be. So he has really done almost a 180 on this. And despite having long resisted calls for reform, he's now taking some very aggressive policy platforms and hoping to get the endorsements of others on this. So check this out. These are some of the sweeping changes. An 18-year term limit for justices. That means that in, 17, 16, I don't know how many years, Amy Barrett has been on it, but get her out. That means that we would already be done with Clarence Thomas. Do you understand? He would be gone already. We would not have to deal with him anymore. An 18-year term limit. Remember that lifetime appointments were designed when people were dying at 35. Like 35 was... This is Western, like white Western culture, okay? You were getting diseases and everybody had scurvy. Everybody's teeth was bad. Hygiene was terrible. You think right now getting a couple of weird influencer families that don't bathe their children is random and weird? Just imagine what it was like back then when Native people and Indigenous people were like, you guys are gross. Like, please do something about these smells. That's why they had diseases to bring over, because they were dirty. Point is, 18-year term limits for justices. People are not dying when they're 35 years old anymore. We're living too long, and these Supreme Court justices they just go on for weight. It's too much. So the other would be a binding enforceable ethics code for the high court. That means, just a binding enforceable, that means that they're not above the law. That means that they're not above the law. So when they are out here doing all these weird shenanigans and illegal dealings and backdoor shady behaviors, that could now be criminally reviewed should they overstep. He's also pushing for a constitutional amendment that would prohibit blanket immunity for presidents, okay? This is a huge rebuke against what the Supreme Court has just done for Donald Trump, which gives him broad immunity from prosecution for anything that he did while he was like officially the president. So any official acts. And remember, that is a term that has mad room for interpretation. This is maybe one of the most important ones outside of the list of very important things. So do you remember the whole Chevron thing and them overturning that? So that thing that I just mentioned, which is that it would give Donald Trump currently has broad immunity. Get this. So that whole Chevron thing, that ruling that got overturned, that 40-year precedent, imagine that corporations have that level of immunity, right? Because it's a hard thing to try to label or name why that was so important, but it basically would help to reverse that ruling, or at least make it so that federal agencies have power. So basically, this is okay, let me explain it in a way that helped me, because I was like, why is this so important? So right now, federal agencies, their power has been weakened by the overturning of that 40-year decision, the Chevron one that I'm talking about. That means that judges now have full discretion on whether or not a corporation did damage. So think about if somebody develops lung disease because there's asbestos on the walls or whatever, right? Typically, judges would defer to these federal oversight agencies, and I know the conspiracy theorists in us are just like, wait a second, but they have typically worked for us. Okay, hold on. There was actual scientific experts, scientific expertise, and technical experts. So it wasn't just the federal agencies, right? You had technical and scientific experts who were weighing in and saying, hey, this happened because X, Y, Z. The judges would defer to that. Once they overturned that Chevron decision, it made it so that judges just get to decide for themselves. Imagine how easy it is for a corporation to buy a judge then and to say, I want you to rule this way. And they do it all the time, and the judges do it all the time, and we're seeing it happen at the highest levels in the Supreme Court. So one of the things that, like, this would change is that precedent. So Biden himself can't change that, but he can't change that overturning, but he can empower those federal agencies. So I want you to keep in mind how dangerous this court has been. In the time that we've seen this massive right-wing shift, they have weakened those federal agencies. So Biden is going to look to empower them by disempowering the Supreme Court on some level. They have overturned Roe v. Wade. We've seen the implications of that. That means that a decades-long precedent where people had agency over their bodies and women had agency, that was a multi-decade precedent, 40, 50-year precedent. That was overturned because of the Supreme Court. That means that people just don't get to choose. That's what he took away. That's what Trump took away. That's what the Supreme Court took away. This Supreme Court eliminated affirmative action in college admissions, right? And a lot of Asian folks that felt like they were getting pushed out because of this overinflated idea of black people just getting in carte blanche despite being underqualified, which absolutely is not the case if you actually look at any of the data, and we all know that the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action across the board are white women, but a lot of them are figuring out the hard way that it wasn't actually because of black people. You had a better chance of getting in. Like, if you actually want to tackle what's keeping people out of these like Ivy League schools outside of the price point, legacies, okay? If you want to talk about something, let's talk about that. Anyway, and the last thing that they did that's just very egregious there's a litany of egregious things, is that they invalidated Biden's student loan forgiveness program. So he's trying to be a gangster on his way out, basically, as much as he can, let's be honest. But anyway, I mean, it's like, you have OG original gangsters. I'm like, he's something else. Like, he's just old gangster, like old gangster, needs orderlies, that kind of stuff. So he's trying to go out with a little bit of a pop. I would love to see him off that way, but they are making it impossible for that to happen. So if you're asking yourself, why don't I get the student loan forgiveness? This is nuts. I've been paying into this for decades. Let me live. Let me be free. Thank this current Supreme Court. It's one of those situations where we don't know how good we had it until we don't, but we never had it good. So I'm just saying, we already got the wound. Let's not rub salt in it. All right? We don't need to rub salt in it. So these Supreme Court things are likely going to be adopted by Kamala Harris and her policy platform. So if we want to push her on anything beyond her stance on immigration and Palestine and really ending a lot of the funding that's going over to Israel, this is the other thing that we really need to pay attention to, because this is the thing that's directly impacting all of our lives right now. So with that, on to the next. That was important. But is there a gender war happening in America? I'll just say this. I'm tired of living in unprecedented times, as you know. And right now, we have abortion rights, trans healthcare, all of these things on the chopping block. And it cannot be understated how important this election is for that reason alone. But it would be hard to say that this is not being informed by gender, right? Like, not only are our next presidential candidates, one is a Democratic woman and the other is a Republican man, but overwhelmingly women vote Democrat in this country and overwhelmingly men vote Republican. So is there a gender war happening in America? Let's just talk about what gender is for a second. Is it real? Is it not real? Gender is as real as race is. We've made up everything in this world, and we add valuations to those things based on some weird mythical norm, right? And so it's as real and as influential as race is, for example. Race, we just made up stories about people with different skin tones and different complexions, and then we tried to make those things real. They're not real biologically insofar as they have deeper meanings on, am I a different human being or not? Even though, like, there's a case to be made that we're finer, but whatever. It's whatever. There's a lot of fine people in the world. There really are, Point is, when we add valuations to things, we turn them into something else. So race is not real in that I am different from you or I have different dreams from a person who is not black, but we've made it so that my experience of the world is deeply informed by how people value me. Like if I'm getting paid differently because I'm black, if I'm getting paid differently because I'm a woman, for example, those things mean that it's real in a tangible way. There are real experiences of these things. So insofar as something can be real, gender is real. Why so many academics and scholars talk about it not being real, which confuses a lot of people, is simply because it's just one of these made up things, and their job is to kind of point out that, oh, this shit is made up. Like, these traditions that we celebrate are really like decades old in the grand scheme of things. Like, we were living totally different lives like a couple hundred years ago. Like, relax. Like, just relax. So in that way, it's real. And it's, in my opinion, it was never supposed to be how we understand power. Like, race and class are very trustworthy things, but gender is a fickle beast. It's weird. I look in the mirror and I don't know what I'm looking at half the time. I've got girl face, boy body, but boy brain, girl body? And inverse of that. I can't explain it, but that's the truth. That's the truth. I can't explain it. It's the truth. Gender's a fickle thing. So what happens when we say this is one of the most important things in this election? Here's the facts. Why do we care so much about trans people right now? Let's peel it back. It came from this larger tension point on gender. The right doesn't do anything better than us. They just don't. We give them a lot of credit, but they actually don't. They're better funded. But there's one thing that they do that makes it seem like they're better than us, and they're actually just really fucking annoying. Whatever we're too afraid to talk about, they just talk about. And they just give a story. So we were afraid to talk about the differences, and if there were differences between trans women and cis women. Cis meaning same, it's all the same. It's like, I was assigned this at birth, I identify as this, whatever. We were too afraid to get into that. They weren't. They crafted a narrative, and then we started juggling that narrative. That's what often happens. Identity politics was the same thing. It came from something awesome, right? The Combahee River Collective. They took it into their propaganda machine, threw it back at us, and then we started juggling it like that, like their definition was the definition. And so that's one of our weakest points. But the gender stuff is linked to the trans stuff because the trans stuff is the evolution of it. So let me explain what I'm talking about. So in 2018, right, we had this big moment. Remember when Chimamanda Adichie was like the penultimate feminist in the world, and we were all just like, oh my God, tell us how to like live. What do we do? So in 2018, she said, right, there are trans women, and trans women can be trans women. There's nothing wrong with that. And like, there's different experiences of women. Like, then there's just like cis women, whatever. I don't even know if she used the word cis, but she was. And there was this moment where I was really like, oh, this is really interesting to me because I think we can get into the nitty gritty of it. Don't worry, I'm going to answer the questions. But, it was like, we can get into the nitty gritty of it. And some people took umbrage. Some people got upset about that because it wasn't fully explained. But I saw this moment where we could really, really get into what it means to be a woman in the 21st century, right? Instead of that happening, Chimamanda acted really weird about getting criticized, and then she like tripled down. Like, it was this beautiful moment where you have to deal with a little bit of like, our folks are going to throw things at you, right? And you got to be adept, and you got to move. You got to move with it, and some of it is good shit. Not all of it is stone. Some of it are, oh, I didn't think about that. I need to consider that. She responded very badly and then tripled down and then basically was like, trans women are different and they don't have periods and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, that's the argument, periods? I don't really want to get into that because it's more than that. But let's just like speak of facts. Women are 50% of the population, the most underserved, under-resourced, understudied, underfunded, half the population in the world. We don't understand endometriosis. We don't understand polycystic fibrosis. We don't understand why Black women and Asian women have a ridiculous amount of fibroids and experience that disproportionately. We don't have any real, like there's, in terms of how America treats pregnant people, pregnant women, right? You are more like I hate using this framing, but just from a newspaper perspective, or from a journalist perspective, we treat them like third world countries. And I hate that framing. But the point is that people who are giving birth here are dying at exponentially high rates, and they skyrocket when you are black, for example, in LA County. So if you are a black woman in LA, you are 300% more likely to die from maternal morbidity or mortality than your white counterparts, who are still likely to not do well. I mean, 6 weeks pay. What are we doing? After giving birth, after dropping a person from one of the smallest holes ever? Like, what are we talking about here? But we lost trans rights and we lost abortion rights. This is what I'm trying to point out, is that they're one and the same. The right understood that. The right understood that. They were unafraid to be like, trans women are just this nasty thing, and women are these other things, both need to be subjugated. But because we were unwilling, or we were too afraid to kind of grapple with that question and that tension, they were now stuck within their speaking points. But we're only stuck as much as we want to be. Like, this could be a web or it could be honey. You know what I mean? Like, it's really up to us. Because my thing is, we overcompensated by saying, well, trans women are women. Okay, I totally get that. But we still didn't talk about the tension points around our own limitations and our own language. So put a pin in that for a second. Let's get back to this. Is there a gender war happening? I wanted to point out how the left kind of ended up in this weird place. Here's the thing. It comes down to attitudes. This is the thing that's really weird. So let me just read this to you. So one of these, I was reading this article, and it was talking about how this election might end up in a high water mark in gender polarization, right? So women are breaking off hard for Kamala Harris, and men are voting overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. And there's this big question about why this is happening, because there was a point in time where men and women in this country were more aligned around things like abortion. And they're now looking and how do we come up with an explanation for this, and how do we figure this out? How did we get here? What do we do? So look, one of the things is this might just be normal, and we don't actually need to be studying this more, but I'm not one of those people. This is what interests me. So John Sides is a political scientist at Vanderbilt University. So he said that the gender gap is real, but it's just not what people think it is. So he goes, the parties are more polarized by gender attitudes than they are gender itself. I was like, now this sounds super academic, right? That's annoying. But basically, he started to ask questions. So he was like, if we were just to throw behind 100 people behind a wall and ask them, are you a man? And people said yes. You can't get anything from that. But if you ask them, do you feel like your gender is oppressed? It turns out that both men and women are saying that they do. They feel like they're oppressed because of their gender. Now, I know that might seem a little bit silly for but I understand. I have to come in trying to understand a thing. And the truth is a lot of Trump supporters are what I would call alpha cucks. So basically they talk about being alpha men, and they want all the things that come with being an alpha man, but they also identify very much with a victim mentality, which is I have been oppressed. What's interesting is that, and so they veer towards traditionalism because they think that the feelings that they have will change if you move if you move towards traditionalism, which is what the Republican Party represents. If you actually go deeper than just gender, which is not simply just woman, but what do you actually want? What Democrats and what that ideology points to more is not traditionalism, but liberation. They want change. So if you actually go deeper, it's not about gender as in male, female. It's gender attitudes, which is I want it to go back to what I believe it was because I think I would feel better there. And the other is that's dumb. Why would we ever do the same shit that's created these ridiculous conditions? So is there a gender? No, it's a battle of beliefs, and it's being masqueraded as a gender war because we're all easily manipulated when it comes to these really easy explanations, because we want the stories that best supports our own beliefs and our own biases. For example, we talked yesterday a little bit about Me Too, okay? All of these things, so there's your key argument for whether or not a gender war exists. No. But the war concept and the framing is very exploitable because our pain is very exploitable. So if men believe that they're in pain because we are losing traditionalist values, they're going to go over there. And if women believe that they're in pain because of those traditional values, they're going to go over to liberation. But on the left, we've done a really bad job grappling with our own gender contradictions, and that's what concerns me. Not because I'm terribly concerned for us. I don't think that there's massively grave implications. I think we already know what the massively grave implications are. But I think our fear around grappling with these things made it so that the right was able to gain ground where they shouldn't have. For example, abortion. Why didn't we fight for that in the way that we should have? Why was I not? There was a huge movement around trans rights at the time where abortion rights were on the chopping block. These two things were not united, right? And you may have heard me like bitch and moan at different episodes about how irritated I get with the great battle of beliefs, and how irritated I get with like this, we're the most oppressed people and we're the canaries in the mine, right? I'm just like, okay, again, like what's the mine? Sorry to be on the nose, but if not a vaginal canal, because fascism understands that if you control women, you control the country. But it wasn't a lapse in care, it was just a lapse of attention. We were so subsumed with the idea that trans rights would secure rights for everybody, but actually women's rights fold in trans rights, but trans rights don't fold in women's rights. It might evolve, but that's just the reality that we're in. But because we were so afraid, we made bitches so scared to talk about what was going on with their bodies that they just stopped. Right, for fear of being called transphobic. And we were throwing out transphobic cards like you would not believe. Like, there was a couple of people I didn't like, and I was like, I might just call you transphobic. I'm kidding, I didn't. I definitely went to racism first. I'm kidding, I don't do that. I wait until I'm in public with my white friends, and then I say, how could you ever say the N-word to me? And then I scream it, and then I run away. And always in a crowded room with white. That's how I punish the whites in my life. I'm just joking, I don't do that all the time. I've done it a couple of times. My point is, and like, here's the thing. It's supposed to be silly, but it's become very serious. And I know it's supposed to be silly because I will never pass. I took a little bit of testosterone because I believe that men needed help, right? I felt like I could help them with some PR because that they're in pain is very clear, but how they're articulating that pain is very silly. So I was like, let me get in there and let me help. So I took a little testosterone, right? I became an immediate expert on cryptocurrency. And I cared very much about whether or not Pete Rose gets inducted into the Hall of Fame. It matters to me so much now. I understand. This is a very serious thing to me. I love cars. I always love cars, okay? I always love cars. But now I really love cars, and I like going fast. But like, let's be honest, right? Isn't a car guy really just a horse girl? Gender's a spectrum is my point. It's a spectrum. It's supposed to be fun. The only thing we should care about regarding gender is whether or not we feel hot. Do you feel hot today? Are you feeling hot? Are you feeling good about yourself? Are you feeling cute? That's what matters, but we've turned it into this like massive thing and this massive war. One of the things that I'm most tired of hearing is that men are isolated and they're lonely and they're depressed. Here's the truth. They are. Because everybody is. It's not, once you go deep enough into the shit, right? Yes, I am black. I experience certain things in the world because I'm black, right? And I'm also trans or non-binary, whatever's going to get me the most on any given day. So I'm that too. But when you go beyond the things, we all long for and want the same things. We want friendships. We want, some sense of fairness in the world. We want some kind of safety. We want fun and love and shit. And that's what we all want. There is a loneliness epidemic across the board. And we keep trying to suggest that it's informed by gender. The one thing I will say about that is we have made it, like patriarchy makes it so men can't talk. They can't talk to anybody about anything that they're feeling if they're men, because they get punished for that. But then what happens is they trauma dump on women, and women end up having to do the caretake work and everything else. So, and that it's not just men, it's masculine people in general. So I gotta tell you, I don't believe that gender is the problem. I think our attitudes around gender has seen major shifts and major changes. And that's the thing that we have to be the most careful about. Because look, a lot of people are calling for the abolition of gender. I love gender. I love it so much. I I just don't think there should be a limitation on how many there are, because there are 8 billion people in the world. How boring would it be if we had 2 genders for all those people? For those who are like, I'm still confused a little bit about sex and gender, because I want to make sure that I remember it all. We start at like, ground zero, move up, is like, sex is biological, gender is presentation, right? And for a lot of people, those things really line up. Because I am a 6'3", very dark-skinned black man in my head, I really want to emphasize the chocolateness. Like, man in my head, like, there's a version of me that believes that I'm straight, like, because I'm also slightly homophobic. It's like I've become so queer and so trans that I have like horseshoed it, and now I'm a little bit homophobic. Like, I'm so gay that I became homophobic a little bit. It's very it's very confusing, very tricky. But our attitudes, we are becoming, I want us to be really clear that it's about liberation versus traditionalism. And I think that men are being sold a lie, that if you go back to this, you will feel better about yourselves. Because what the right does is, once they take our talking points, because the talking points that we were a little bit too scared to make, they go out and they give you a scapegoat and say, this is the problem. You feel this way, or traditionalism is dying because of trans people. And it's like, there's like a couple thousand trans people in fucking America. What are you talking about? And then they say they're afraid of the children. They're afraid for the children. You are a streamer that plays video games, right? Which honestly is a sport. I fuck with it heavy. Like, I'm a low-key gamer. But like, you do video game and prank streams. Why are you talking about trans issues suddenly? This is how influential this fucking right-wing shit is. But they're talking about, in the right-wing thing, I'm fearful for children, and they're making up lies about puberty blockers being permanent, and they're actually not. It actually stops young people from making rash decisions. It buys them time. That's all puberty blockers do. And I did the math, because look, I'm an athlete. I was an athlete first. I took testosterone, and a nigga changed. Like, I got strong. But I'm not the side of things that people have concerns about, because testosterone is the strengthening hormone. But estrogen is not the strength hormone. It has totally different implications. And so if an Olympic committee is saying these things are safe, I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go with what the science says about a particular matter. But I want to say, like, I want to bring up Me Too for a second, because I do think it is something important. And, my homie KR mentioned that, these things can be expounded upon. What criticisms do I have for Me Too? Because that also informed our gender analysis here in 2024. So for the left, the big breaking points was our ness around transness, and how do we talk about that with women? And we accidentally ended up sidelining women in the process, because it's like, we can actually do both. We can lift all these communities up. That's what trans women have been doing forever, just lifting communities up. And so it's not about deprioritizing trans issues. It's about connecting them to body autonomy, because that's all abortion has ever been about. It's not really about women necessarily so much as the control of women and the control of people's bodies and people's minds. That's what traditionalism is. It's like, keep it the same, love the status quo, and now just a bunch of dudes who should be like literally like freedom fighters are just circle jerking to traditionalism and the status quo. I'm like, I thought you fucking hated that shit. Didn't you watch Braveheart? Like, what are you doing? Listening to friggin' Jordan Peterson, that nigga cries more than trans women I know with the highest estrogen dose you could take ever. I know people who are out here doing an IVF procedure just like doped up on estrogen don't cry as much as Jordan Peterson does. Come on. Like, you're telling me gender is not a spectrum? Okay. That's like Harley Quinn, if Harley Quinn stopped being cool and then transitioned into a man. Have you seen his cartoonish ass suits? Like, what are you talking about? Oh my God. He's like, like Andrew Tate, Broken Clocks, like, he's right once, twice. Aesthetically, I find him so compelling. He's ridiculous looking, but that's it. They all are like cartoon villains. Musk, cartoon villain. These are not your heroes. I refuse to believe these are men's heroes. And when you talk to them, they're not. But I'm like, dudes are just stop reading at like 36, 38 years old and then just listen to a bunch of podcasts and then repeat those things. I like you as a thinking person. Be a thinking person. But anyway, let me go back to a little bit of storytelling around Me Too. Okay. So Me Too was an important movement. It was a very important movement, but it relied on a little bit of like public vigilantism. The reason why public vigilantism existed in the first place or was necessary was because the current structures that women or people who could be preyed upon, whatever words you want to use, that existed was not protecting them, right? They could not turn to those structures for protection. And we know that the criminal justice system, I don't know who it works with unless you're like some sort of white collar criminal. I couldn't tell you who it actually works for, these days, but because it penalizes poverty, it penalizes the poor, it penalizes people of color, it penalizes any kind of queerness or whatever. The list goes on, which is why who is in the court systems matters so much. Anyway, so Me Too came out of this need, and it was a very, very simplified version, right? It's about holding powerful men accountable. Except, like, what power looks like changes depending on who we're talking about. So it made sense for a Harvey Weinstein. He's a serial, abuser, whatever. These are the terms that people were using, which means he's done it. He's done this a million times. He's been confronted on these behaviors. It hasn't changed anything. And so it made sense. And it made sense for a guy like R. Kelly. These people have no remorse, right? Articulated no remorse, no culpability, whatever. But it got really complicated because it relied on this idea of it was holding powerful men accountable. It was holding men accountable. So it relied on this idea of a violent gender. Right? This is how the left has participated in it. So the first one we have are on trans issues and our inability to talk about trans women and women in a nuanced way. And the other thing is that we relied on this violent genders construction, right? And an intervention absolutely needed to happen. But it needed to evolve. So what happens when Aja Argenta, who's like the face of Me Too in that time, suddenly gets found out to have, she at one point had sexual relations with a person who was 17, that just gets swept under the rug. Ooh, can't talk about that. And then let's fast forward when it came down to Junot Diaz, right? It got really complicated. So there were two men of color threw a real wrench in it, right? Because you had Aziz Ansari, the comedian, and this random unvetted blog post came out that said that he had harmed somebody during a date, and it started out as consensual, but she changed her mind. And I got to tell you, obviously it came with a lot of backlash, but journalists and feminists and scholars that I know, and I got to tell you, I was like, I had questions about the veracity of that, because I'm all for, like, of course, believe women, right? Like, but it's believe people, right? We had to say believe women because women were not typically believed, right? That's not the de facto energy. We automatically go to like believing whoever is not the woman in the room is the one that's going to be believed. And then it goes down to things like race and class or whatever, but we just generally don't believe women. But what can happen is we just jump to the other side, which is everything that everybody says is correct. Because then what happens when you have women who are abusing people, or what happens when you have two women in a relationship? What happens when you have two femmes? It gets a little bit complicated when we rely on the construction of a violent gender. So Junot Diaz, he was accused of several things, but the biggest accusation, let me wrap up the Aziz Ansari thing. So that had massive effects on his career, right? Okay, like he's okay. But nothing came of that paper, like nothing. That article disappeared once it went under scrutiny, but the damage had already been done. So Aziz Ansari is rich. I don't think he comes from wealth. So we're not talking about what is power in our new construction, right? We talk about rich, but I know when I'm talking about rich, I'm talking about billionaires and multi-millionaires on the way to being billionaires. I'm not talking about a fucking actor that's got like 15 to 30 million. I understand that is a person who has money, and that's not, but I'm sorry, but rich today is not the same thing. I'm interested in power. So the water starts to get a little bit muddy. Let's move on to Junot Diaz. So he gets accused of being essentially a misogynist piece of shit. That's really just what it was. That was the major accusation. He's rude. He doesn't listen to women. I'm like, have you read his books? It's him over and over again. He cheats. He cheated a lot. And then there was one issue where somebody said that he had kissed He had kissed her non-consensually at an event. MIT, just for the record, did a independent investigation because he teaches at MIT. It was years in the making. I did circle back. It was unfounded. I don't know. It could be something as simple as he has huge supporters in MIT who were just willing to see it through, or it wasn't founded. I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you this, because this is what matters. When these accusations started going around, Junot Diaz writes a paper. Yes, the timing should be scrutinized, right? Because he didn't write this paper when it wasn't war times for him. He wrote the paper when he was under scrutiny. I think it was for the New Yorker, but he wrote this article that essentially said that he experienced child sexual abuse. And because of how that impacted him, so his uncle sexually abused him, and it impacted him in a way that made him incapable of having meaningful intimate relationships with anyone. And that women became because he is a straight man who was in intimate relationships with women, it led to serial cheating behavior, right? If you look at some of the effects of being abused at an early age, and really being abused at any time, you know that is the inability to form emotional connections with people. It is real. So it's not, oh, I'm hurt and therefore I can do whatever I want, but it's context that matters. What concerned me was Tarana Burke, who is the founder of Me Too, and very much like, in the public eye and leading that particular charge. Had swept the Adria Argento thing under the rug. It was obviously a crew of people, the whole like Time's Up crew or whatever. They got really awkward. I mean, you saw the whole thing kind of crumble over time. But she said, we're not falling for this kind of ruse. And that concerned me immensely, because what happens when we say that just because it happened to a man and because he's now being a shitty person, that he's making this up. It's a ruse. I can't get behind that. I really can't. It was so detrimental, because we had a moment to really shift our understanding of gender and violence in this country, or at least on the discourse level, which I'm interested in. And it also really delegitimized. I mean, you have a man who's talking about experiencing one of the worst things in his life, and we're like, you're a fucking liar, or you're using this for sympathy. Who the fuck would use child sexual abuse for sympathy, right? I can't. Here's the thing. Statistically, boys and girls experience sexualized violence at the same rate. Statistically, right? That means that we don't treat children well on any level, regardless of gender. Then we train these two populations of people how they should act and be. One, girls, I was socialized as a girl, right? I was socialized as a woman. So I can say you are taught to destroy yourself. Boys, right? And I had a little bit of experience with that, right? Because I kind of had a weird, different adolescence, even though I will likely never pass. Or I'll look like Prince with no talent. But anyway, on the other side, boys are very much conditioned to perform their anger and their rage, and that there's a reason for it, because they were promised things. So they're taught to be destructive externally, right? Even though because they actually have to kill off that inside person first, right? You are punished for any kind of expression of emotion, which is why so many disgusting child predators search for boys in particular, because there's a less likely chance that they will ever speak about it. So my point is, violent genders doesn't work. Masculinity is not inherently violent. It's just an attitude. It's an expression that we've attached meaning to. But the systems that we actually need to look at are patriarchy and misogyny. So what is the answer? What is the antidote if we're looking at violent genders? It's gendered violence. What does gendered mean? What the fuck does that mean? Okay, so when I was 8 or whatever, 9, my mom shaved my head. I did not want it to happen. It was not a fun experience for me. I had what was thought of to be bad hair at that time. So I went from being a little girl, and in that moment when my head was shaved, I'm now being read as a boy. I didn't want to be. I have a twin sister whose hair goes down past her butt, you know, so I'm having this like constant, oh, you guys are twins. Oh, here's to your son and here's to your daughter. And it's like, no, I'm also a little, hello, right? I want to be pretty. I am a pretty, but that gender presentation, I didn't change because I wanted it to, but people saw me as different. So I was gendered because of my hair. I identified as a girl at that time, right? But because of what I look like, I was gendered. So it's what happens when we look at people and make a bunch of decisions based off of what we think they are from what they look like. So everybody gets gendered is my point, right? So you know that if it's like, we know that some guy who's like really beefy and this and that, we might think that he's super strong and he's super masculine, but actually he might just be like a big softie, but we're gonna make assumptions. We make assumptions about people based on their height. We make assumptions about how dark their skin color is. We make assumptions based on their size or how they carry themselves. We make assumptions about people all the time. That process is called gendering, whether we know it or not, right? We're making a bunch of conclusions about that person based on whether or not we read them as more masculine or more feminine, right? That comes in with race. If you are a tall, dark woman, if you're a tall, dark-skinned black woman, you are masculinized all the time. Like, if you talk to some of my homegirls, it's wild. Like, you know, black women generally are painted as more aggressive, for example. Like, we have these Jewish men are painted as like very delicate and anxious. I'm like, have you met some Jewish men? Like some of them, no, actually every nigga I know who's Jewish with IBS is also a gangster. Like they're very anxious, but very high functioning in that anxiety. So I'm like, but we gender them. We say these are, because you're like this, or because you talk about your feelings, you are an effeminate man, right? Or because you don't seem vulnerable, you are a masculine woman. Like, we come up with gendering all the time. But the process of gendering, if we were looking at gendered violence instead of violent genders, we would have to look at race. We would have to look at class. We'd have to look at size and ability, because those things matter. We would address the Junot Diaz situation differently. I don't think we did our best job or our best work. And because shit got messy, we have this tendency on the left to be like, ooh, I'm just going to leave that that burning fucking trash can right there, and I'm just going to go over here. But the right lives in the trash. They're garbage eaters. They don't come up with a single thought on their own. They live in a reactionary, reactive state to us, because we are the cultural creators. We are the discourse makers. We are what is fucking interesting. So we started out with the Me Too stuff and honestly, a lot of dudes responded really poorly to it. I look at movements with grace. I'm like, people are trying to figure shit out on their own with very little information. There's going to be some struggle. I didn't love Me Too as it was happening, but I understood its importance. I also was like, I'm going to give this time to grow. It didn't grow the way I wanted it to, but it still gave us some tools that we can rely on now that matter. The trans thing was our second dumpster fire, right? And so that was something they picked up on. So they're coming hard with this like super theocratic traditionalist nonsense, and dudes are being drawn into it. And we have this thing where we're just like, well, fuck them then. Like, oh, men make me uncomfortable. Da, da, da. I got to tell you something. I love men. I love women, right? I love femmes. I'm like, I live for them. But in my, like, I identify with masculinity. I identify with, I'm a student of masculinity. And yes, they're not all there. It's true. It's so true, right? Like, women, we talk about women being crazy. Like, they are. I remember being a girl, and I remember telling a dude, right? A dude, when I'm like 20, I was like, get the F out of my house, right? And he goes to leave. And I was like, so you're just gonna fucking go? You're just gonna leave? First of all, I'm gay. Why was he there in the first place? We had a fucking platonic relationship. Second of all, why did that happen? Was it a test? I don't know. It was happening before I knew it was happening. But there's a craziness in everybody, but women are crazy specifically because men are sociopathic and not all there. And trying to talk to a wall makes anybody nuts. It just is the truth. But the thing is, there's a person behind that wall. And that's who I'm interested in, because it turns out men will treat you really well if you don't want anything from them. It's really bad. But I'm like, they're so nice to me because, interestingly enough, I might be super alpha male in my relationships, but for some reason, there's some black men in particular out there who will always see me as a girl, and they're just like, peace, queen. Oh, how can I help you, queen? And I'm like, you know what? This makes me feel nice. I feel pretty in this moment. I'm going to ride this out. But anyway, I digress. The point is, when we don't pick up these fights, we create these dynamics that are easy to interpret as a gender war, where it's just men versus women, and boys are from Mars and women are from Venus. And it's like, no, but like women like Venetian food and like the freedom. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, if Mars is the same, then it does not make sense. Like, it's not women's fault or migrants' fault or trans people's fault that you are unhappy. It is late-stage capitalism and a patriarchal society that tells you that you should be a fraction of a person but feel like a man. That's insane. That's wild. I vehemently reject the idea of a gender war. But we do have a battle of beliefs, and gender has been sucked into that. And we need to be very careful about how we participate moving forward, because don't forget, like, we are not pouring gasoline on the shit, okay? But we're the paper. Like, we're the plants, we're the paper, we are the material, because they don't exist without us. They are so fucking boring without us to talk about. They have nothing to say. They have no vision of a future. That's why they're always looking at the past. We represent the future. We're cuter, we're funnier, we're smarter, but we have to be a little bit more courageous, a little bit less fearful when it comes to debating each other, because that debate is how we figure things out. So I want us to debate without losing each other on the way, because again, we could throw everybody away. How has it worked out for us so far? Right? Some of them we throw away. Earth is round. They come right back around again, but now they hate us. Or we excommunicate our own community members. You don't even talk to your roommates, half of you. All trans people done blocked each other. We already talked about it. We block each other. There's 2 non-binary people holding that whole community together. You know it. I know it. So don't buy into the bullshit. We're in the great battle of beliefs. Gender is a part of that, but we are really fighting liberation or traditionalism. That's it. They're going to muddy the waters. I think gender is fun. I love talking about the nuances of my experiences with both, because I'm like, it's true, I'm a little homophobic. Anybody gets near this booty hole, I'm like, no. But I love gay porn. So I'm a contradiction. I'm a walking contradiction. We all are. That's what gender is. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be hot. So let's just remember that and not get sucked into the hype and figure out how to make it less meaningful and more fun, because it makes it so that more people actually can see themselves in it, because feminist values doesn't mean anti anything, right? Unless it's bigotry. So yeah, I'm not saying coddle men. I'm saying, are we inviting people in to our movement? Because we're not even talking to each other at this point. Because I got some things to say. I know you've heard me talk about this other stuff with, how we betrayed women in a really significant way. We did, and we kind of still do. And so, whatever our future is, it has to be feminist, and it has to be one that has the massive broad strokes, but that feminism can't rely on the assumption of gender and people's behavioral patterns from that. Masculinity is allowed to get away with things because of patriarchy and misogyny. So if we address the patriarchy and misogyny, then masculinity goes into a place that is better, much more adaptive, and hella gay. So that's my diatribe. I reject the notion that there is a gender war. It comes down to gender attitudes. I want us to fix a couple of ours. I introduced some new concepts. I'm really curious to hear it. Again, not violent genders, gendered violence, and body autonomy, not just abortion, not just trans, body autonomy. It's about traditionalism and the fucking status quo versus us and liberation. So let's hit those VMs for that question of the day.
Hey, Future, it's Zachary. I have 3 questions.
Oh.
What's your favorite color? What is the hardest lesson you've learned in life? And what quality do you most want to change about yourself?
Okay. These are good. Okay, so my favorite color is green. It makes me the happiest. I don't know why. I don't wear it as often because I'm too light skinned and I look like I have jaundice with the wrong colors of green. But I love green. I love looking at it. 2, the hardest lesson that I had to learn was that I could do it alone. I know you're like, what are you talking about? But I had this fear that I wasn't enough. And that whatever belief I had, like I stayed in things I shouldn't have stayed in longer because I was afraid of being alone. I let myself be other people's generals and protectors because I was afraid of being alone, and I felt like I needed to be useful in order to buy my way into some, people's lives. And so that was the hardest lesson, is like, no, I'm going to roll a hard 6 on me and see what it's like to build out something that I believe in, that everybody can come into. But then that leads to the third thing, which is what I'm struggling with, is that just because you can do it alone doesn't mean you should, right? Like, I want to have company. I want to have friends. I want to have community. And I'm trying, like, I had to ask a stranger last night. I was with my homie KR, but I was like, we were at a comedy thing, and I asked a stranger, I was like, am I approachable? I had to, because nobody talks to me. I'm like, is it me? Am I not approachable? I'm wearing bunny ears. Like, I don't know how much softer I can make myself look. But yeah, just because I can do it alone doesn't mean I should or that I have to. So being more open to just having people around me that I really mess with and that I really love, and then just being. That part's really hard for me. But those are some dope questions, Zachary. I really appreciate you asking me that. Anyway, I hope this was a useful one. Don't forget, we got to push Kamala on this fucking Supreme Court thing. If Biden can see this through before he goes, honestly, he'd get 1 point. Just 1 point with me. That's all he would get, that toothy bitch. Anyway, with that, that's a wrap. Just want to say thank you so much for listening to Landline. It means the world to us. It means the world to me. This really is a labor of love. We be dropping new episodes Monday through Thursday, about to kick it up to Friday. We are on all streaming platforms. Spotify and Apple are the best ones. Don't forget to drop your voice note questions to landlinewithjfk@gmail.com. Shout out to KR and the Landline team, and shout out to you, the listeners, who make it all possible.